Hi, everyone. This is the final recording of the chronic pain sessions, and it's focusing largely on eating and sleeping well. So our main objectives are to discuss what foods are good for your health and chronic pain, the link between poor eating and poor health, which is chronic inflammation, food you should avoid, and the gut microbiome and why that's important. So in a nutshell, ideally we should be eating food that reduces the stress on the brain and the body, and also eating food that reduces inflammation in the body. So just to explain a bit about inflammation, there are two types of inflammation. There's acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. And much like pain, acute inflammation occurs in response to physical injury or infection, such as a cut or a bruise or an infection. The body releases inflammatory compounds, and basically they help heal the tissues. Unfortunately, in chronic inflammation, the body is releasing inflammatory compounds, but it doesn't release the anti-inflammatory compounds. So you have this ongoing inflammatory response, which is not a good thing. So it's quite different. Chronic inflammation is quite different from acute inflammation. It's often low grade. You might not notice it, but eventually it can start damaging healthy cells, tissues and organs. And over time, this can lead to DNA damage, tissue death and internal scarring. So acute inflammation is helpful, whereas chronic inflammation is harmful. So chronic levels of inflammation in our body greatly increases our risk of developing lots of things as well as chronic pain. So it increases your risk of being overweight. And not only that, but actually being overweight can increase your inflammation levels. So when you put on weight, you don't actually develop more fat cells. It's just that the fat cells that you do have swell. And if they swell so much, they actually start to release inflammatory compounds as well. Chronic inflammation is linked to diabetes, arthritis, mental health problems, cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and even respiratory and chest disease. So inflammation sensitizes the nervous system, and the more inflammation you have, the more pain that you'll have, and vice versa, less inflammation, less pain. So factors that increase inflammation are an unhealthy diet, which we'll discuss in more detail, chronic stress, poor sleep, unhealthy relationships, having a lack of purpose, and also a lack of movement or sitting around a lot. Factors that reduce inflammation are healthy nutrition, positive social connection, reduced stress, good quality sleep, and regular movement. And this can reduce the risk of chronic physical and mental health problems. So what are the pro-inflammatory foods? Basically, ultra-processed foods, fake foods, takeaways, all of these things have been shown to increase inflammation in the body, and high fat, high starch, starchy carbohydrate foods are also pro-inflammatory because the starch gets converted to sugar. High sugar foods are definitely pro-inflammatory, as is alcohol. Anti-inflammatory foods. So many of you may have heard of the Mediterranean diet, and a lot of these principles are the same. However, we haven't called it that because you could obviously a variety of different kinds of cuisine so long as you're sticking to these basic principles. So ideally, a mixture of vegetables in a rainbow of different colours, because that gives you lots of different phytonutrients and polyphenols. Really what you want is a lot of variety of these things because they have anti-inflammatory effects. Fruits, obviously you have to be a wee bit wary of hidden sugars in fruits, but apples and berries are the lowest in sugar, and as I say, they're full of beneficial chemicals as well. Nuts are a really good anti-inflammatory food, and legumes, and by that we mean things like beans, lentils, peas. All of these things are really good, and they're also a very good source of plant protein. So olive oil here, ideally extra virgin olive oil, because it's got some additional benefits. Fish, so this isn't that straightforward. Basically, the real benefit of fish is omega-3. You have two different classes of essential fatty acids. You've got omega-3 and omega-6. So omega-3 is anti-inflammatory and omega-6 is inflammatory. There's lots of different sources of omega-3. Fish is a really good one. However, the recommendations are probably to eat fish only a couple of times a week. It's partly for sustainability reasons, but also we know that there is quite a lot of plastic, microplastics in our oceans, and some toxic heavy metals which can accumulate in the fish. So I'm not saying, absolutely not saying don't eat fish, but just to be aware of that. Plant sources of omega-3 are milled flax seeds. Make sure if you're buying flax seeds or linseeds they're milled, because the body can't process them if they're not. Chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts are a really good source of omega-3. And you get omega-3 in extra virgin olive oil. Some people might choose to take an omega-3 supplement, particularly because there's a lot of evidence now that can help protect your brain health. I would say that if you are going for an omega-3 supplement, to actually try and go for a plant-sourced one, so an algal-based one. This is really because the actual fish get their omega-3 from eating the algae. So rather than eating the middleman, you're probably better getting the omega-3 from the source. Moderate dairy, eggs and poultry. Only occasional red meat, as it can be pro-inflammatory, and actually processed red meat has been shown to be linked to increased risk of cancer, particularly bowel cancer. And dark chocolate is also anti-inflammatory. I think the really big thing is to eat real food, not all these ultra-processed things that come in packets in the supermarket with multiple ingredients. And generally the definition of ultra-processed food, there's lots of different ones, but I tend to say that if you look at the ingredient list and it's not something that you can buy and have in your kitchen cupboard, then it'll be ultra-processed. So beware of hidden sugars. I think we're all aware that cakes, biscuits and sweets are full of sugar, but you also get sugar in other things. So for example, pasta and white rice, and because they are carbohydrate, as are bread and potatoes, they will be processed into sugar. We're not saying don't eat any of these things, but it's just to be aware that there are hidden sugars in a lot of these foods. So again, beware of fruit juices and smoothies, because they often have higher sugar contents, whereas if you're actually eating the whole fruit, you're getting all the nutrients and the fibres as well. Another massive inflammatory thing is fizzy drinks. Obviously the full sugar ones are the worst for your health, but actually even the diet drinks are not good for your health, because although they often say they've got nothing in them, actually they're full of additives which are actually harmful to gut bacteria, which we'll talk about in a bit. And the other thing is that because they're formulated to taste sweet, your body prepares for sugar, and then it doesn't come. So often they'll leave you feeling hungrier as well. So ideally save your money and drink water. So basically lots of vegetables, some fruits, and ideally a big mix of colours. Bin the beige, your pasta, chips, potatoes and rice. Again, that doesn't mean never eat any of these things, but just watch your portion size and maybe reduce how much pasta you've got and have more of the healthy sauce if you've made it yourself. Reduce and cut out sugar and ultra-processed foods, and reduce meat, especially processed meats. There is some evidence that reducing the amount of time you eat in the day can help giving you more energy and sleeping better. And so what we mean by that is giving your body time to actually rest. So obviously, if you imagine if you're eating from when you wake up in the morning until you go to bed at night, you're not really giving your digestive system a complete time to relax. And there is some evidence that bringing that window in, so say you don't have breakfast till 10 o'clock and you try to eat your dinner by 6 p.m. Can be helpful. Generally, we would suggest that you start slowly. So maybe if you currently eat for 14 hours in the day, that you bring it back to 12, and then just gradually reduce that time. So just to talk about the gut microbiome, this is a real developing area of science. We've known for many, many years that we have bacteria in our gut. I think it's only in the last sort of 10 years or so that we started to really realise how important they are to our health. So actually 50% of our cells are bacterial, and 99.9% of our genes come from the microbes in our gut. So it's not just bacteria, there's fungi and archaea in there as well. We have hundreds of trillions of microbes in our gut, and they actually play quite an active role in our metabolism. They're not just kind of passive passengers. There's no one definition of a healthy gut microbiome, but the general feeling is that the more different types of bacteria you have in there, the healthier, a bit like a rainforest. You need lots of different things because they all do different things. Interestingly, 90% of our serotonin is actually produced by our gut bacteria. So an unhealthy gut is awful. Microbiome is often called dysbiosis, and these are the main causes. So a Western diet high in fat and sugar, high in ultra-processed foods with all these different emulsifiers and stabilizers that are harmful to your bacteria. Taking a course of antibiotics can be harmful for your gut microbiome. That is not to say that you shouldn't take them if you need them. If you've prescribed them, that means we think you should be taking them, but they can have a harmful effect. There are other medications that can affect your gut microbiome, such as proton pump inhibitors, omeprazole, lansoprazole, esomeprazole, and quite a few other medications, including actually opiate painkillers. Bacterial infections can affect your gut microbiome. Sleep deprivation, not sleeping well, definitely has an effect on your gut microbiome. Alcohol, environmental toxins, of which there are many, and also your genetics plays a role. The good news is that your gut microbiome is actually quite modifiable, and it has been shown that you can really improve it quite quickly. But likewise, if you go from eating healthily to eating unhealthily, it also will change quite quickly to be a less healthy gut microbiome. So one of the really big things that these bacteria in your gut need are fibre. We're supposed to eat 30 grams of fibre a day, but in fact the UK average is only 18 grams. So it's always difficult, isn't it, when we're talking about grams of this to get an idea of what does that actually mean in terms of food to eat. So this is just a diagram from the BBC website that shows what 30 grams of fibre would look like. And we've already talked about eating a rainbow of fruit and veg, ideally 30 different fruit, vegetables, nuts and seeds per week. This also includes herbs and spices. So it sounds a bit overwhelming at the start, but if you actually add in things like garlic, turmeric, cinnamon, and all these different herbs and spices you might cook with, then that does increase it. So if you want to see where you're at, I would just start on a Monday, write down everything you've eaten, and then see when you get to 30, and remember to include nuts and seeds as well as spices. Fermented foods, so that's your kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, yogurt, all of these things are good because they do contain some bacteria, and they'll usually say on the side what the different strains are. You can obviously also take a probiotic. I think the evidence is a bit mixed how much of these bacteria actually make it all the way into your large bowel, which is where most of your gut microbiome is. And also you get probiotics of widely different quality. So some will have very few a small variety of bacteria, and others will have a lot more. So I'm absolutely not saying they're a bad thing. It's just that the evidence is not absolutely clear cut. And I think you can't take a probiotic to counteract an unhealthy diet. You really need to be improving your diet. And if you want to take a probiotic as well, that's not an unreasonable thing to do. Try and avoid ultra-processed foods as much as you can. It's really difficult. They're absolutely everywhere. In the UK, the average is about 65% of our diet comes from ultra-processed food. Exercise is really good for your gut bacteria, particularly exercise outside. Making sure you're sleeping well, trying to manage stress as much as you can, and social connection actually improves your gut microbiome. And don't forget water. Try to drink about 2 litres of water every day. Okay, so what can you change? Eat less processed food, cook more from scratch. I realise sometimes that can be really difficult if you're sore to stand in the kitchen, but if you just try, as we've talked before, to pace yourself to build up to it, you could split the food preparation throughout the day. If that makes it easier for you, make simple swaps. Ideally, try not to eat for at least 2 hours before bed, and try and avoid evening snacking. Introduce more fruits and vegetables onto your plate, and drink more water. If anybody's interested in finding out more about what's in their food, there's a fantastic app called the Yucca app, and you can download it onto your phone, and you can scan things in the supermarket, and it'll not only tell you what's high fat, high sugar, but it will tell you what the additives are, and whether they're harmful and what the specific harms are. So moving on to sleep, sorry, this was questions which we were supposed to ask. I should have hidden this slide. So I'll just go through these. So the first question is, we should all sleep 8 hours a day. As you can see from this, it hasn't come up all that well. That's not actually true. How much sleep we need changes throughout our life. For adults below the age of 64, it's already from 20 to 64, it's between 7 and 9 hours. But when you get over 65, sometimes your sleep does reduce. So how long you sleep is not all that matters. It is really important to think about this sleep stages. The reason this is important is when we get on to talking about sleep medication. So basically, stage 1 and 2 here is as you're falling asleep, that's known as light sleep. And then you come down into stage 3 and 4, which is deep sleep. And this is a really important stage of sleep. Then we come up into what we call rapid eye movement sleep, and this is when you dream. And again, this type of sleep is really, really important. Generally, you tend to get most of your deep sleep in the first half of the sleep cycle, and then relatively more REM towards the end of it. So if you can't sleep, it's not best to stay in bed until you fall back to sleep. Generally, if you've been lying awake for 20 minutes, the general advice is that you should actually get out of bed, go and sit somewhere quiet and relax. Don't put on the TV or go on your phone or go on the computer. Just try and sit somewhere quietly until you feel sleepy and then go back to your bed. A warmer bedroom is not best for sleeping. Ideally, the temperature in your bedroom should be between 16 and 18 degrees because your body cooling is one of the things that can help precipitate sleep. Alcohol does not help you sleep and it reduces the amount of rapid eye movement sleep that you have. And we should all be in bed at 11 o'clock. This actually isn't true either. Everybody has a sleep chronotype. Often people are not only one of these things. You can often be a bit of have different characteristics. I think I'm definitely a lion. So how does it work for chronic pain? So sleep deprivation increases your cortisol, which increases inflammation, which we've already discussed is not helpful, and that increases your pain. So there's things that you can do that improve your sleep. The first thing is having a regular sleep-wake time. So ideally, you should try and go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time every day, because that helps your body establish a good sleep cycle. Often, a lot of us go to bed earlier during the week and then stay up later at the weekends. And the general feeling is that actually, if that is the case, you're still better getting up at the same time as you do during the week rather than lying in really late, because that can upset your sleep cycle. It's really important to have some wind down time before bed. If you're absolutely buzzing, come in from work and you go straight to bed, then generally your mind's racing. Try, if you can, to avoid having difficult conversations just before you go to bed. And having a sort of bedtime routine can be really helpful, because then your body associates that with preparing for sleep. Daylight, this is a really important thing that affects your sleep. And basically what you want to be doing is to try to spend 20 minutes outside in the daylight, ideally in the earlier part of the day, because this affects what we call your circadian rhythm. So basically, if you've got time, you could stand at your back door for 20 minutes in the morning when you're having your morning cup of tea or coffee. Sitting at a window doesn't count, unfortunately. You have to actually be outside to get some daylight. Being active is really important in improving sleep. We generally recommend you avoid really vigorous activity for at least a couple of hours before you go to sleep. So ideally, do your more strenuous activity earlier on in the day. And your bed environment, making sure your bedroom's dark. We've talked about the temperature, 16 to 18 degrees. And ideally, not noisy, although I realise that can sometimes be out with your control. So just to go over that again, try to go to bed and get up around the same time every day. Try to spend at least 20 minutes outside in the morning. Food, so low fibre, high fat or sugar diets are associated with poorer sleep, and vice versa. High fibre, low fat and sugar diets are associated with better sleep. Exercise can improve sleep, but avoid all but gentle exercise too close to bedtime. Yoga is a really good thing. You get these sort of 10-minute wind down yoga routines on YouTube, and one of those can be quite helpful as part of a wind down routine. A warm bath or shower an hour before bed can be helpful, because once you come out of the warm bath or shower, your body starts to cool, and that's again a sign for sleep. Breathing exercises, which we've obviously talked about quite a bit, meditation. And we put writing in a journal here, but we have previously discussed that sometimes writing in a journal can be quite triggering and bring up quite a lot of emotions. If that's the case for you, I wouldn't be doing that at bedtime. But if it's just some general thoughts about your day, then you know, that might work for you. If you find you sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking of things you need to do, writing a to-do list before bed can actually help. And ensure your bedroom's dark, not too warm, and 16 to 18 degrees. So these are things that can affect your sleep negatively. So naps can reduce what we call your sleep drive. If you do nap, ideally we'd say for no more than 20 minutes, and to try and do that earlier in the day. So not napping at sort of 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening, because that can negatively impact your sleep. Alcohol and cigarettes. Alcohol, while you might feel it helps you fall asleep more quickly, it really affects the quality of your sleep, and you'll often wake up more. Cigarettes, obviously we would advise that you don't smoke at all, but if you do smoke, try and avoid having a cigarette for at least a couple of hours before you go to bed. Try and avoid eating really heavy meals just before bed as well, because that can affect your sleep. If you've got lots of anxiety and worry, you know, sometimes doing breathing exercises or meditation, or the other things that we've talked about, trying to manage stress, can improve your sleep. Screen time, this is quite a big thing. I think we're also attached to our phones, that we're often on our screens just before we go to bed and go to sleep. But actually, the light that your screens and even TVs and computers emit is in this blue spectrum here, and your melatonin, which is one of the things which helps you fall asleep, is actually quite dramatically reduced by light in this wavelength. So as well as the potentially stimulating effect of some of the things on your phone, if you get an upsetting email or see something on Facebook or Instagram that upsets you, again, that can affect your sleep in its own right, but so can the light emitted from your phone. So ideally, try and avoid any screen time for an hour or two before bed. Caffeine is a stimulant, and it also has what we call a long half-life. So the half-life is how long a substance persists in your body, to reduce by 50%. So the half-life for caffeine is 6 hours. So you can see that if you're having a cup of coffee at 3 o'clock, 50% of it's still hanging around at 9 p.m. So ideally, make sure you're not drinking caffeine in the late afternoon and evening, because it tends to make you more prone to waking up during the night, and it can also increase anxiety. So this is just a slide of the different caffeine contents of different drinks. As you can see, brewed coffee has the highest, but there is even still some caffeine in decaffeinated coffee, and watch out for those energy drinks. So not only are they full of harmful chemicals for your gut bacteria, they've also got quite a lot of caffeine in them. So the other thing is how sleep affects your appetite. So if we've not slept well, we have more of this hormone called ghrelin, which increases your appetite. Whereas if you've slept well, you have more leptin, which reduces your appetite. So you know, all of these things are interlinked. I think the other thing is that we tend to make poorer food choices when we're sleep deprived, and also feel less inclined to exercise. So moving on to medication for sleep, there is no pill which induces natural sleep. So we used to prescribe a class of drugs called benzodiazepines for insomnia, particularly temazepam and nitrazepam. As you can see, the number needed to treat for these is 13. So that means you have to treat 13 people for one person to have a benefit, but the number needed to harm is 6. Zopiclone, which is a sleeping tablet, we tend to prescribe more. Now, in one study, resulted in 7 minutes more sleep than the placebo. So basically, they had a group who took nothing, a group who took a placebo pill, and a group who took Zopiclone. The placebo group slept for 15 minutes more than the people who took nothing, and the Zopiclone group slept for 22 minutes, meaning they had 7 minutes more. The NICE guidance is we should never prescribe Zopiclone for more than a 2-week course, because quite quickly you develop a tolerance to it and it won't work. But not only that, it actually affects sleep quality, and it reduces both deep sleep and rapid eye movement. You do get rebound insomnia, so when you stop taking the tablets, often you find it really difficult to sleep. You have quite a lot of side effects. It can cause grogginess, daytime forgetfulness, slowed reaction times. And one study actually found those taking sleeping pills were 4.6 times more likely to die over a 2.5-year period. Other medications, and we've talked about amitriptyline in the pain medication webinar. So it does shorten the time to fall asleep and decreases awakening, but it suppresses your REM sleep. It also potentially has long-term memory issues. Antihistamines, and we sometimes use old-fashioned antihistamines such as promethazine to try and help sleep. But it can lead to impaired attention and memory, and it reduces the duration of your REM sleep, and again has potential long-term memory issues. And both of these drugs have anticholinergic activity. So the best thing that we have for sleep is actually something called CBT for insomnia. It's got a large body of evidence in a lot of trials as being an effective and long-lasting treatment for 50 to 70% of patients. So that's a number needed to treat of less than 2 and a number needed to harm of 0. It does take longer to work than medications, but the improvements are sustained over time. So there's a Sleepio, which is an app-based or web-based program for 6 weeks. It is free in Scotland to everybody under the NHS. So when you click on the Get Started here, if you select that you're in Scotland, you do get access for free. It's also, there's a link to it in the sleep section of our website. So this is just the health and well-being section of our website, where we have lots of information about food and health, mental well-being, sleep, gut microbiome, physical activity, and stopping smoking. So if you think about your day, what do you do that debits your sleep account, and what do you do that credits your account? And obviously, once you kind of know where you can maybe do things differently, try and introduce some changes. So that's the end of the course, and obviously we've just discussed a lot of things. Again, just to stress, this is really meant to be delivered in a group situation where we can have discussion and people can ask questions, but just as obviously we do cover quite a lot of information, quite a few people in the group had said it'd be really helpful to have the sessions recorded, particularly if they missed them. So this is just a summary of lots of the things that we've discussed. Remember to pay attention to exceptions. So when your pain it doesn't seem to affect you, when it seems to get worse, even though there may not be a physical explanation for that, looking back at the timeline of your pain, noticing at times of difficult circumstances, where was your pain worse? Did you develop new symptoms? Writing a breakup letter to your pain to say, thank you, I understand that you've been trying to protect me, but I don't need you anymore. Somatic tracking, we've obviously discussed in quite a bit of detail. Meditation, cognitive behavioural therapy, journaling, being aware of when you're on high alert, breathing exercises, visualization, thinking about your medication. Is it actually helping you? Trying to introduce more movement, anti-inflammatory foods, and making deposits in your sleep bank. Don't forget this very important thing, which is pacing, trying to avoid this boom and bust cycle. So doing lots, being really sore, having to take several days to rest, reinforcing the message to your brain that moving is painful, and then ending up in this boom and bust cycle, as opposed to just increasing your activity a very little and trying to maintain that for a period of 1 to 2 weeks before increasing a little again. You will get much further forward with that. If you're planning on making changes, remember to set SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time. So rather than saying, oh, I'm going to walk more, you might say, I like walking. I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk every day this week before I have my lunch. And I'm going to walk around the block. And that way you don't need to think about it. You've made a plan and that's what you're doing. So that's us. Obviously, if anybody's got any questions after watching these webinars, please contact the surgery and make an appointment to speak to us. Thank you.